some being member of G20, and India will lead the G20, but with emerging and very poor countries as well, because they have to be part of this reshaping and this reinvention of our new solidarity. And I know that you spoke about Richtown as well, and obviously Barbara will be part of this co-chairs. And third, we will deliver concrete results. And we want very concrete actions. So this is a summit for a series of coalitions and actions.
Mr. President, yesterday, Hugh Evans, the CEO, obviously, of Global Citizen, he announced his new Global Citizen campaign, Power Our Planet. And what Hugh and Global Citizen wants to focus on is figuring out how to fill the $16 billion climate funding gap that was already promised to the Global South in 2015. So the question is, well, a couple questions here. First of all, what has been the holdup, and what do you plan to do to help the Global North move towards filling this gap for the Global South?
Look, this is very true that we have to increase the efforts towards the Global South. Now the question is, when we put these figures, which, I mean, what are we discussing about? And this is always the complexity. Some of the very poor countries need more subsidies, no loans, no private money, because there is no private money going to some of these countries. So we have to commit for more subsidies, very clearly with specific amount, but it's a country-by-country approach. I will revert on that. Second, for some other countries, they will request loans. And sometimes when we put billions and billions, we put together loans and subsidies. This is very different. So some other, much more emerging, they need loans. Third, some others, when they have to face with the consequences of climate change, they require some change in the calculations, some change in the debt sustainability approach, in the contract with World Bank and IMF. So this is a change in terms of regulation. Fourth, some of them need public money as a sort of first loss guarantee and private money. So we have to be very precise, and this is one of the perspectives of this summit, not to add in a certain way this type of amounts which should not be compared. Second, what we need is a new approach with the poor and emerging countries, a sort of country-by-country contract. This is exactly what we managed to do during the past 2 years in order to decarbonize some economy. This famous Jewbee, Partnership for Just Energy Transition. And we signed, for instance, with South Africa such a contract. And this is very precise and concrete. South Africa committed to deliver a plan in order to decarbonize its economy. And World Bank, IMF, but as well France, Germany, US, UK, and some others, plus private money committed for very specific financing because you have very specific action. This is exactly what we have to do for this big batch of 100 billion commitment through a country-by-country approach. What Chad, Zambia, or some other Southeast or Latin American countries need is very different from what Indonesia or Brazil will need. So we need this country-by-country approach, and we have to be very precise on how to re-engage public money on the bilateral, multilateral side, and private money.
Now, on just a couple of general issues following up on the new approach to the poorer countries. First of all, there's obviously the $100 billion in the IMF fund that was given. There's $37 billion still outstanding there. And so global citizens are curious about what can be done to unlock that $37 billion to help the poorest countries who obviously are in the most dire need. And also, can you address a real concern that we're hearing here at this summit, and I know you've heard an awful lot there as well, that some of the poorest countries have to pay some of the highest interest rates to move toward cleaning up their environment. How can that be reformed?
Look, as for the reallocation of the special duty rights issued by the IMF, all those who committed to reallocate now have to finalize the plan. This is not yet done. Through ratification, vote of the parliament, and so on. We committed to go from 20% of reallocation to 30%. This is what France will do, and we will push during this summit and for the G20 in India to do so. So now it's just a question of implementation. So this is as well for the richest country, how just to respect the commitment. And I just want here to remind us that in the G20 in Roma, we committed to do so. If some countries have difficulties for legal, technical reasons to reallocate this SDR, they can decide to take budget money. Second, for the poorest country and the problem you mentioned, this is very true. But let's be clear, this is because these countries, they do need subsidies and no more loans. And we have to agree on the principle, and this is one of the objectives of this summit in Paris in June. And what I just mentioned when I described the structure of this famous 100 billion, is that for some countries, this is not private money. Private money will never go in a very poor country because they have no return, because of the difficulties and the country risk. And it should not be loans sometimes, because this country have such a debt situation or so much difficulties that they cannot afford having loans. They just need subsidies. And we have to agree and reset our own approach that in our metrics, we have to reinvest in subsidies for certain categories of countries. And this is very true, that in order to face inequalities, in order to face food security, healthcare systems difficulties, and climate change, sometimes our very poor countries need more subsidies and no more loans. And if we accept to have this category and to commit all together, this is one of the key delivery for me of the summit.
Mr. President, over the past few days, Global Citizen's been taking questions from across the world on social media. And we've got a great one here from Susan Francis from the UK. And she asks this question: what are you doing to ensure that countries and companies that have caused loss and damage actually pay into the new loss and damage fund?
This is very true, and in the former discussion you had this approach with oil and gas companies and different sectors being part of the origins of this loss and damage. So first, I think, and it's part of the Bridgestone agenda and what we want to put on the table here, this is having a bigger commitment of the richest countries and having a bigger commitment in terms of financing, but I would say fair and right financing. And what we want to do is to invest in these countries being victim of the first loss and damages, to have more investment in subsidies, in first loss guarantees, in loans when it's adapted, to precisely face this consequence. So re-engagement of the richest countries in order to reassess and reprecise the framework. Second, we want, as a private company, companies and investors, a commitment as well during the summit, be sure that they will invest in this very country a fair amount of money, and especially when they are involved in sectors being largely involved in the cause of these losses and damages. So what we need is not just vague commitments, because in Sharm el-Sheikh we had the beginning of the process, and we committed, we agreed the principle of a fund. Now, for me, in the Paris summit, what we want to do is a mechanism, and sector by sector for the private sector and for the richest countries through very clear commitments, an approach in order to be sure that we invest the right amount of money and we bridge the gap with the financing requests of these countries.
Mr. President, you recently visited China. That made a few headlines in the United States and across the world, as you're aware. As you know, China is it's the biggest annual emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. They're also considered by some metrics to also be a developing country, so they don't have to adhere to some of the strict standards. I'm curious, did you get any assurances from President Xi that they would take concrete steps to move towards participating more globally to reduce greenhouse emissions?
Yeah, I think we need three things mainly regarding China. Number one, it's to accelerate the peak for CO2 emission. As you know, they still have a lot of coal plants and coal activities. So they accelerated regarding the first, in comparison with the first announcement they made. What we want them to do is to reach the peak before and to start decreasing.
Hey, settle down up there.
I mean, I didn't get at this meeting, but I urge President Xi to engage in that direction. Number two, it's to stop financing and developing with the key emerging countries and the key partners of the Belt and Road Initiative, clearly to develop and finance coal activities. They made a lot of effort, they improved on this issue, but we have to be closely coordinated with them and work very closely with them in order to completely stop the financing of new coal plants in their key partners in third countries through China. Third, they have to be engaged in this famous partnership we want to do and in what they do with poor and emerging countries, especially in Africa. As you know, China finances a lot African economies especially. We managed 2 years ago to involve them in our global framework, i.e. to be more respectful with the OECD rules. And one of the objectives of this summit is as well to have China being engaged with us, given their own exposure in terms of financing of these countries. Now, what we want to do with China is to completely engage them to be much more consistent in terms of debt sustainability for these countries, but to avoid, through their financing, to finance, non-compliant activities with our own strategies. And we want them to be much more involved on developing renewables and sustainable energies and activities in Africa instead of helping them to develop new coal plants or coal activities. And on this issue, I'm reasonably confident that we can have with China signing new roadmap and new commitments.
And finally, Mr. President, China is the number one emitter. Of course, the United States, who's going to also be involved in the planning for the summit, is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases and actually historically at the top of any list. Is the United States doing enough right now to cut emissions, to help fund the desperate needs of the global south and to move toward a cleaner economy?
Look, I think the US is engaged today in a very ambitious and efficient way to deliver a concrete result through the different regulations passed by the current administration, and President Biden is very much involved in this green technology and green industry strategy. So I think the US as an economy has a very clear roadmap, and I think a very efficient roadmap. One of my concerns is to be sure that we manage to have a synchronization between Europe and US, and we preserve the integration of the value chain. And this is what I advocated in December when I visited the US. As far as the US is concerned, I think this strategy is a very smart and efficient one. Second, now what we want to do with the US, and US is a key player, is to be sure that all together we invest much more towards poor, developing and emerging countries in order to help them to accelerate this transition. And this is where having the US on board on the reform of the World Bank, acceleration of the reform of the IMF, finalization of new instruments and new incentives, and these innovations will be part of what we want to deliver for our summit in June, is absolutely key. And having the US being much more on board to finance them and to innovate with us is critical. And finally, I think the more we can have the US working with China in such a roadmap will be very useful. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, for the June summit, one of my key objectives is on this roadmap, and one of these key outcomes to have both the US and China on board. And if we want to win this battle for biodiversity, climate change, and fighting against poverty, we need both the US and China on board for sure.
All right, President Emmanuel Macron, thank you so much for being with us. We're grateful that you spent time with us to talk about climate change, and we are certainly all looking forward to the summit this June. And I'll be sitting down with you, I believe, for a more lengthy discussion. But it's so great to have you here. Hugh Evans and the entire Global Citizen community appreciates it.
Thank you very much to you, Joe, and thank you to everyone in New York, and thank you to the whole community and Global Citizen. I think this type of mobilization, this discussion, but as well having inspiring people with you is extremely important to mobilize everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. And now, Mika, you can go back to talking about Tucker Carlson.
No, we're good. We're good. Joe, thank you very much. Great interview, of course, with the French president for Global Citizen Now. We'll be right back with much more. Morning, Joe.
Some of that stuff, it was difficult for me to understand what the French president was actually saying. I'm thinking that whenever he was saying that some of the smaller countries should be given stimulants, maybe that's kind of like a grant, maybe, I don't know. But finally, it appears like the world has finally awoken to the problems that they have initiated for themselves, that hopefully within the next few years can turn some of these events around regarding the forces of nature that are acting so abruptly ugly upon to the Homo sapiens here upon to the planet. I still say, and I still believe, and I'll always believe, that we should not be where we are right now pertaining to all the grief and the misery and the destruction that has suddenly intensified just within the past few years here, not only in America, but throughout the world, that we would not have to be where we are right now if things would have been handled properly in the late 80s, early 90s, pertaining to the Reagans and the Bushes. That was the tipping point of where humanity here in America took a strong left turn whenever they should have took a strong right turn, that has brought all kinds of grief and all kinds of burdensome problems to not just the American people, but the world. So hopefully a great deal of what has been discussed today with the Global Citizens meeting that we're seeing, hopefully these things will be looked upon and taken very, very seriously, to the degree that we will be able to turn some of this around. Once more, I personally believe that it's not just based upon what we do to the planet, but what we do to each other and how we live out our lives in conducting our lives, because in essence, it's God, the Creator, that protects us from this type of evil bombardment that we're going through right now. And whenever humanity as a whole, looking at the masses, whenever they basically bite the hand that was feeding them, to the degree that the Heavenly Father is no longer protecting us in that aspect.
Worst strikes in weeks. The death toll still climbing at this hour. We're on the ground in that war-torn country with a live...
See, all that right there could be prevented. I mean, one horrendous event right after another horrendous event, regardless whether it's horrendous events coming from mankind or it's a horrendous event coming from the forces of nature. We should not be where we are right now as a whole, pertaining to the inhabitants here upon to the planet, if things would have been properly handled in a proper form going back 30 plus years ago. But because they wasn't, and of course, we can't cry over spilt milk at this point in time, now can we? The best that we can do now is just try to reform, rebuild, and go in the direction that God intended for us to go into back many, many years ago, that hopefully we'll be able to catch up or crawfish back to where we're supposed to be to begin with. In the meantime, we've got all this controversial stuff that's going on, not just here in America, but all over the world, regarding whether it be our politics, regardless whether it be our way of life, regarding where it be wars, or regardless whether it be the forces of nature. We've got lots of issues that we have to cover between now and true peace and utopia. Lots of issues in all the countries, not just part of the countries, not just the biggest countries, but all the countries. And if we're not willing to wake up to those facts, then our hole that we have dug in for ourselves will only get deeper and deeper and deeper.
If you do that, I made a big mistake 5 years ago. This is already in the public record. Elise, just how important was it to get Pence's testimony?
Anna, thanks for having me on your new show, and congratulations. Mike Pence was at the center of this. He has the most important eyewitness account, given that he was the largest figure that Donald Trump was trying to persuade to overturn the election. And so I don't want to speculate about what he is going to present, new information that we don't know. But whenever we have heard directly from participants who were there that day on January 6th and who saw and heard what Donald Trump was ordering and what he was thinking, it has been pretty explosive. So I think that who knows how he is going to navigate the fine line between still being loyal to Donald Trump and also just keeping his vow to the Constitution.
Michael, let's talk timeline here. For context, the last time a special counsel was looking into Trump, it was Robert Mueller and that investigation. And from his appointment to the final report, that lasted nearly 2 years. Jack Smith, this special counsel, was only appointed in mid-November. It's just been months now. So go back to your hub and spoke analogy here. If they've just interviewed the hub, where do you think the investigation goes from here? Do you think we'll see a charging decision soon?
I don't know that for sure, Anna, but we have had a lot of interviews with the spokes. These are the people who carried out little aspects of the conspiracy to defraud. Now we have the testimony of Pence. We have to see what the testimony of Mark Meadows looks like, because those two guys are the ones who have the most knowledge of Trump's knowledge and Trump's intent. And plus, each of these guys can corroborate the testimony of Mark Short, the chief of staff, or Jacobs, one of the counsel in the vice president's office. So this is corroborative and new. And so I would expect that if we're in a baseball game analogy, he's somewhere in the 7th inning of this investigation. And I think perhaps even a little bit further along in the Mar-a-Lago investigation. So stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, you mentioned the Mar-a-Lago. Let's not forget all the other investigations as well, because Trump was just criminally charged in New York regarding the hush money payments. There's also the Fulton County election probe down in Georgia, where we expect a charging decision this summer. And currently the E. Jean Carroll rape and defamation case that's ongoing right now, and that trial underway already. What do you make of how Trump's been handling all his legal entanglements, Elise?
He politically has gotten a bump. What happened in New York State has been really a benefit for him. You look at how he has energized his reporters. He revamped his message to, if they can do this to me, they can do it to you. And that really resonated with his most hardcore supporters. So you might have had a few Trump supporters who are considering defecting to Ron DeSantis. But if anything, what we've seen in the polling after Alvin Bragg and that happened in New York City, it's been really positive for Donald Trump. I really see this, that case in particular, as doing nothing but bolster his standing.
Elise Jordan, Kendallanian, Vaughn Hilliard, Michael Zeldin, I really appreciate all your voices. Thanks for being with us. When we're back in just 60 seconds, Russia unleashing its worst airstrikes in weeks on Ukraine. An apartment building hit while people were sleeping. This morning, the death toll is rising. Is it the beginning of a new offensive? Plus, floodwaters in the Midwest, unrelenting, even being blamed for a train derailment. And the dangerous weather is not done yet. Also, the emotional face-off between E. Jean Carroll and Donald Trump's defense attorney in the former president's civil rape trial. We'll break down those.
My God. Bombing innocent civilians. More war crimes. More war crimes.
Dead, including 3 children. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing at this hour. I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Allison Barber live for us from Uman, Ukraine. Also joining us right now is Michael Allen, former member of the National Security Council, former special assistant to President George W. Bush. He's also managing director of Beacon Global Strategy. So great to have both of you here with us. Let me just start with you, Allison, and the latest reporting. What's happening there right now? What can you fill us in on?
Yeah, Anna, you played that sound of air raid sirens. It's something, if you've spent time in Ukraine in the last year plus, you're very familiar with it. But as you said, it's something that in a lot of cities, people have not heard for quite a while. This is the largest missile attack Russia has launched on the country in about 2 months. Here in Uman, this is an area where there are just active, frantic efforts to try and find any survivors left behind in the rubble. This apartment building, this is where that missile hit this morning. You can still see some of the smoke billowing up from the basement. Speaking with the spokesperson for the services and the search and rescue teams that are here on the ground, they say right now the plan is to stay hyper-focused on trying to clear out the basement and see if there are any survivors or if they need to recover any additional bodies. Then they're going to try to make their way up towards the higher floors. This was a 9-story residential building. The floors up near the top, you see, we're told 3 of those floors just almost instantly collapsed, as well as the basement.
You don't think that there's going to be a special place in hell for people that deliberately does people this way? For their murders? Sure it will be. And he talks about that. Talks about that very clearly in the Bible, of those that wouldn't repent of their murders, those that wouldn't repent of their evil demonic deeds, that these will be the people that will be targeted in the spirit world, that will give an account for all the damages and all the brutality that they have done to humanity. And this is only just one illustration of that. There's trillions and trillions of illustrations of that that's happened throughout history, throughout the world. But I'm just saying, the people that have done this will give an account, especially whenever it comes to war crimes being committed upon to the lives of innocent people, just as the leader of the Ukrainian party has said that they are targeting them towards trying to euthanize the Ukrainians. And that's exactly what it looks like to me, that they are trying to euthanize, basically completely destroy the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians is standing up for their democracy, and the Ukrainians does not want to be held under the Russian submission towards being their slaves. I personally, at the age of 62, knowing as much about World War II as what I do, in which there's still lots of things that I don't know about World War II that occurred that was nothing more than horrendous in every aspect imaginable. But me personally, at the age of 62, knowing that my biological father, James Robert Jackson, was engaged in that war, I never would have thought that I would have seen anything or somebody on the level of Adolf Hitler basically be unleashed into society towards basically open season. I mean, if you look at this from a sportsman point of view, it's as if the Russians has turned the Ukrainians into open season. And these evil, demonic, cruel, insensitive bastards, as far as I'm concerned, there will be a special, special place in hell for them to be tormented day and night, night and day for the rest of their lives because of what that they are doing to the lives of the innocent bystanders. It goes beyond being cruel and insensitive. It's evil. It's wicked. It's demonic. And what even makes it worse is that other countries sit by and watch this and really, I don't know if they feel like that they shouldn't be involved in trying to stop this, or if they just don't care. I don't know which, but either or, the people that could have some sort of a bearing in stopping this and don't stop this and is not willing to stop this, there will be a special place in hell for those people too as well. Because this is not anything in the category of the Holy Father of good. This is evil. This is evil in its fullest form. And like I said a while ago, at the age of 62, the things that I heard about, read about, seen about in various movies pertaining to World War II, I never would have thought that anything like this would have ever been leashed into society again, in seeing it so openly and so routinely done on a day-to-day basis. I just never would have thought that I would have seen this. I mean, we're not talking about somebody out in the middle of a desert somewhere, of a group of people that ain't willing to fend for themselves, kind of like what the Afghanistan people done whenever they decided 11 days later to let the very people that we had trained them to fight against, basically let them just walk all over. We're not talking about those kind of people. We're talking about people that has assets to society. We're talking about people that has knowledge, wisdom. We're talking about people that can build. We're talking about people that can benefit humanity in medical, science, religion, and all the above, that are being under the onslaught of a maniac right now. Poisonous Putin. And we call ourselves a moral, civilized society here upon to the planet. Wow, I think we need to stop and really look at ourselves, especially the countries that could engage in trying to stop this, that's not engaging. I really, truly think that we need to stop and look at ourselves towards who we really are as a society, especially supposed to be a civilized society that is sitting back watching a David and Goliath event unfold right in front of your very eyes, that basically is turning the Ukrainians into a meat grinder. It goes beyond awful. It's appalling. It's gut-wrenching, appalling, and what makes it even that much more appalling is for people that could engage in stopping this, or at least trying to stop this, are just basically sitting on their hands. I never would have thought in the 21st century, not only about another Adolf Hitler being loosed or leashed out into society, but I never would have thought that we as a society would have sat back and watched anything like this, knowing the characteristics and the damages that it done 75 plus years ago that now are happening all over again. How cruel and how indifferent and how cold and how callous can a society be that knows the consequences of these type of actions but sits idly by and doesn't do nothing about it? You know, whenever it comes to democracy versus this type of ravaging insensitiveness pertaining to communism, socialism, this should have already been put to rest. And it would have been put to rest. I truly believe it would have been put to rest if the church world over here in the Western world, the continent of the United States, would have done the proper and right things going back 30 plus years ago. We would all be experiencing some form of utopia, peace, and prosperity throughout the global society. But because of a bunch of nitwits, because of a bunch of people that proclaimed one thing, but wasn't willing to show their gratitude in another, just as the Bible talks about, I believe it's in Luke 18:8, whenever the Lord returns, shall he find faith here upon to the earth? Well, obviously, the baby boomers and those that was a part of this movement that began 30 plus years ago, obviously, those are the very people that God was talking about, that whenever he returns and he finds these people that are cowardly in that sense, that those will be the people that God basically looks at and says, depart from me, for I have never known thee. Not only was themselves being cowardly, but themselves wasn't willing to support those that wasn't willing to be cowardly, which adds insult to misery as far as I'm concerned. Deadliest strike in 2 months. In other words, we're going to hit a concentrated rural area, knowing that it's a bunch of civilians that sleep at night and children living there. We're going to hit this place come hell or high water, regardless of how the world may look at us. And now, as the world's looking at them, now the next question is this: what's the world going to do about that? What is the so-called civilized society going to do after they see this and they can do something about this, but they choose not to? Who is the actual sicker of the two? The one that's committing the act, or those that sitting idly by and watching the act being committed, but they're not willing to stop it or put forth their best foot in trying to stop it? Who is the sickest out of the two? I'll let you do your own mathematic figuring on that.
Area. We were speaking to one woman who told us her daughter and grandchildren lived in this part of the building, and she said the majority of the apartments were set up in a way where this side that's all gone, those were in a lot of instances bedrooms. This happened at about 4:30 a.m. That means a lot of people were sleeping. Over here, and we'll walk a little around some of the cars because there's a lot of movement, again, as people come here to try to get information on the other side of the building to try and recover what belongings they can. Back in this area, there is humanitarian aid set up for survivors of this strike. There are also horrifically a lot of people here waiting, trying to find out if their family members have survived. Some people over there have already gotten word that some of their family members did not, and now they're waiting to find out about others. Rescuers on the ground, they tell us that they are still hopeful despite all of this destruction, despite so much of this building looking like it's something that would be impossible to survive. They say they're still hopeful that they might find survivors. They expect to be here for hours searching through this building alone. Russia is claiming they were targeting military structures in the last few days when they've struck different areas. They've said they were targeting areas where there were some reserve deployments that Ukrainian military officials were using. But having been on the scene, having spoken to quite a few people in this area, and you can look with us again, all around here, all of this, Anna, everything you see, these are apartment buildings. It is hard to imagine that there was anything here it's hard to imagine there's any truth to what Russia is saying at this point. Everyone we have spoken to, we have seen children, families, young and old, who lived in this building or knew someone who lived in this building, and now people are on the scene waiting really all around, just desperate for any sort of answer, praying for good news, even as the death toll just continues to climb. Honest.
What they need, what Russia needs, is a dose of their own medicine. And what it needs is the world to stand up against this type of tyranny and show them that the world is not going to sit idly by and watch this without there being consequences involved in doing this, even at the expense, I'm going to say this very carefully, even at the expense of creating more carnal damage. Because it was the Russians that intentionally, willfully went after a group of people that could have done this in a more sensible, humanitarian way, other than an all-out-and-out bloodbath. And because of it, they deserve to be given back that in which what they have put out to the rest of the world, or especially to the rest of those living in Ukraine. That's what they deserve. Now, rather not we have a country or countries that's willing to give them a dose of their own medicine, and punishing them for doing this is the next $64,000 question. And I realize if you was to drop a bomb in the middle of Russia on top of the Kremlin, you would destroy innocent lives. I understand that. But this is where the military, looking at it from a military perspective, has to weigh out the differences between the lesser of the two evils. Which is worse, in watching this endless bloodshed, this massacre, continually, almost every day? I mean, even though this may have been the worst strike in 2 months, there's still endless lives that has been destroyed, that as far as I'm concerned, there's still not no accountability in war crimes that these evil demonic people over in Russia has committed. I mean, how can a nation, any nation, first of all, put any kind of trust at all in the people coming from Russia? Secondly, how can any nation stand idly by and watch this and say this was justifiable? This is not justifiable. This is cold, brutal, insensitive, wicked, demonic death and destruction. And if you can't convince a group of people in a sensible way towards doing the sensible thing, then the next alternative is to do like the NRA talks about all the time, and a good person with a gun defeating a bad person with a gun is going in and making believers out of those people that are doing this. That the good people actually don't have no other choice, because now they have been pushed to the degree or to the extent that now they have to use the same type of force that they have been witnessing just to be able to overcome the evildoers. And I've said this all along, that, you know, the day of sitting around and idly praying for the victims of those that get massacred over here in America, those days is over with. Those days is over with. Your prayers don't mean a daggum thing if you're not willing to get off your feet and actually commit to those activities. That's the reason why that the founder of the Windmill Ministries has been putting out as many videos as I've been putting out on social media. I've been trying to get my message out there to the people towards basically getting them off their rear ends, rallying the people, and doing the proper and right things. But it's as if I'm talking to a wall or a tree, or as if I am talking to myself, because I'm steadily seeing society take one step forward and 2 steps back. I'm still not seeing a true Holy Ghost revival. I'm still not seeing people coming clean of those that was involved in this belliterateness that went on now 30 plus years ago, this movement that has put us where we are today. So why wouldn't I say that the Americans are full of you-know-what whenever it comes to them speaking out of both sides of their mouth, saying one thing about peace, but in reality, not willing to act upon to it? Why wouldn't I say that now after the umpteenth video that I put out, basically indicating the same thing again and again and again? Why wouldn't I say that? I would be a fool not to say that. It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to act upon it. Just like all the gun violence that's going on here in America.
You know, it's startling. One thing in Kyiv is you'll get the sense when you're there sometimes that you have these moments of what feels like absolute normalcy. But when you talk to people who live in these cities that are further from the front lines, they will tell you they know it is a temporary feeling because something like this can happen at any moment. And that's the constant fear in Ukraine for people who don't live right along the Eastern Front, is that Russia has spent so much time targeting other cities by air, by missiles, that they know that sometimes it feels like they're just random and that it can happen anywhere. Remember in the winter, and our team was here in November as Russia had started their very aggressive air assault on energy infrastructure in Ukraine, and it was just constant air raid sirens. Then that slowed, so there was a bit of relief, a bit of normalcy, but most people here will tell you they know that that's temporary, that it's not real. And this right here is an unfortunate, horrific reminder of how quickly things can change in this country, even if you think you are far enough from the front lines. Anna.
Allison, thank you so much for that reporting. Again, it's just hard to fathom what it's like to live there right now. I want you to go get safe, so we'll say goodbye. Let me bring in Michael here. As we looked at those images, Michael, and heard her reporting, what do you think is going on? Is this a new offensive for the spring?
Well, first, I think it's a reminder of the barbarity of the Russians. They usually launch attacks like this to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people, to condition them, perhaps for earlier peace talks. That always fails, by the way. But you know what? I do see this as part of the coming Ukrainian offensive directed at Russia. The Ukrainians have been hitting fuel depots and critical supply nodes within Russian-held territory. And I think the Russians are trying to hit back, show that they still have some fight, because what's coming soon is this absolutely critical spring offensive where Ukraine desperately needs to make a lot of progress, and especially in the south of Ukraine.
I just want to hit a few of the other headlines that have come up out of Ukraine in recent days. You have the city of Bakhmut, where fighting continues. That's to the east. The attacks on a Ukrainian museum. You have troops beginning training on Abrams tanks. Where do you see things right now when it comes to this battle? Is there one side winning the war?
So the battle in Bakhmut is pretty much the only big battle that has been occurring for the last few months, mostly because the Ukrainians have been waiting for their armor, their other weaponry and ammunition to arrive from the West, and for all the training of the soldiers to be complete. So I think they're about ready to go and broaden the battlefield tremendously. Bakhmut has been a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, I think, from the Ukrainians. They have worn down the Russians, but they also have lost tremendous loss of life throughout that process. And I think it's time for a different phase of the war where the Ukrainians can make more dramatic progress to bolster their prospects in the West, where people need to be able to have the confidence that if they spend additional money on Ukrainian armaments, it's going after a good cause.
Obviously, people want to see peace, want to see this resolved, and we understand that President Zelensky had a phone call with China's leader, Xi, this week. Zelensky calling it a long and meaningful call. Xi's been trying to position himself as maybe a peace broker in this situation. Do you see that being realistic, especially given China's relationship with Russia?
I don't see it as a realistic opportunity for China to get in and play a role in eventual peace talks. I know they want to. I know they want to be a player like the United States. They want people to ask over time, not just what does Washington think about an issue? They want people to say, what does Beijing think about a particular issue? So I think that's their game, but I also know that the intense diplomacy toward the Chinese right now is do not send lethal weaponry to the Russians. They've come up to the line several times. We, the United States, have publicized the intelligence that they were thinking of doing it. And reportedly, they backed off so far. So that's a huge objective of Zelensky and President Biden. Hey, China, don't.
I think, this is what I think. I think they want to give out the images towards being peacemakers, towards being civilized. But in reality, the whole damn shooting kvetch is evil. Because they're sitting here watching these people basically being genocide. What other explanation can anybody come up with?
Apache helicopters were returning from a training flight when they crashed about 200 miles north of Anchorage. The Army is withholding the names of the dead until their families are notified and an investigation into the cause of this crash is underway.
Oh, man.
Up next on Ana Cabrera reports, a rare closure of Yosemite National Park starting today due to a looming threat of unprecedented floods. I'll talk to a park ranger about the impact there, plus high alert as 22 million Americans face another day of wild weather and one miracle in Fort Worth after a boy was struck by lightning.
Train derailment because of the flooding.
Velshi at 10. Watch weekend mornings on MSNBC.
Millions across the country are being impacted by severe spring weather that's only expected to continue into the weekend. Flooding along the Mississippi River has led to evacuations and is suspected of causing that train derailment there in Wisconsin. Our Maggie Vespa is live from Davenport, Iowa, with the very latest on the ground there. Maggie, how are people coping with all the floodwaters where you are?
Yeah, so Anna, basically the waters here, we should be clear, are still rising, and they're not expected to peak until Monday. So people basically, we've been hearing the phrase sitting ducks a lot, like a lot of nervousness, a lot of anxiety watching this water rise. And keep in mind, these people are used to floods. This is a riverside community, obviously, but typically the river is literally hundreds of yards that way. So it's ominous watching this water move up as slowly but as consistently as it has been. That being said, this is a story of widespread flooding up and down the Mississippi, but other communities on different timetables. Like further north, in places like La Crosse, Wisconsin, water has already crested. Now it's a question of when will it start to recede. That remains to be seen. All of this happening up and down the Mississippi River, as down south, a very different story plays out with twisters causing some serious damage.
This morning, severe weather wreaking havoc across multiple states. In the Midwest, the swollen Mississippi River is continuing to rise. In DeSoto, Wisconsin, investigators are combing through the wreckage of this train derailment, trying to determine if floodwaters caused several cars to spill off the tracks near the river. People in La Crosse, Wisconsin forced to flee flooded homes with river levels cresting there. A gas company near Davenport, Iowa, cutting service to more than 100 homes.
If the forecast is as bad as they think, how high would it go?
This is 21.
Wow.
This is 21.6, I believe, right here.
Down south, the story is tornadoes, with at least 7 reported twisters, 6 of them in Florida alone, one striking just outside Tallahassee. This look from above shows the damage in one neighborhood, the severe weather snapping trees and stripping the roofs from home after home. This week's multi-day stretch of relentless back-to-back thunderstorms, unloading dangerous winds, hail, and lightning. And dangerous storms will continue to pummel the southern plains to the west. 22 million facing yet another day of severe weather. But this morning, some good news in Texas. 2 young brothers in Fort Worth recovering after getting hit by a lightning strike.
I died last night and came back to life.
Across the country, millions still on high alert this morning as this severe spring weather marches on.
We're so glad those 2 kids in Texas are recovering, as we said. So we want to be clear, back out here on the Mississippi, the water continuing to rise here in Davenport, Iowa. People continuing to watch it as it moves up from the river, again, typically hundreds of yards that way, across the railroad tracks, across a park, and now up along this downtown street where we're standing right now. This is normally just a section of downtown. I'm in the middle of the road. You can see the traffic lights behind me. This is now all completely submerged. And there are wider issues coming from this as well. Kind of speaking to the historic nature of these floods, the USDA, in a rare move, announcing all barge traffic has been halted in the northern section of the Mississippi River because of these rising floodwaters. Basically just another factor as this slow motion disaster, as our team is calling it, continues to play out.
I know you've been there for days, Maggie. I can't believe that floodwater is all across the street with the...
She talked about the tugboat drivers being restricted 5 months ago, approximately. The tugboat drivers was restricted then because of the mighty Mississippi being so low, breaking all-time records, that it slowed down barge traffic tremendously. Well, now they're being told that again, towards restricting barge traffic, because now the rivers has went just the opposite direction. Once more, we're seeing these irregularities continually to bombard humanity in such horrendous, tremendous ways that who would ever thought within a 5-month period we would have went from one extreme to another pertaining to the mighty Mississippi. And who's to say that before summer's in that we won't face the mighty Mississippi towards doing the same thing again in becoming excessively low and dry. Weather right now is freaking out. Just like the people on the planet is freaking out. And I've said this again using this analogy. You see in front of that young lady that's standing in front of that water right there, there is a imagery basically mirroring itself in her shadow of where she's standing right there. You see the mirror effect right there where she's standing? That's her shadow. And if you was to back the camera up another 5 or 10 foot, you'd probably see her whole body and you wouldn't just see your bottom part of her legs. Whenever heaven looks at us, it looks at us in the same way as a mirror. And whatever heaven is looking down upon to the earth and seeing, it reflects back, kind of like a ping pong. I've used that theory before. It looks back at the heavens And whatever that the world is dishing out is basically how the heavens is going to respond and react to humanity. And the crazier that humanity becomes, the crazier that the weather becomes. And right now, the weather is totally off the charts. Not just here in America, but all over the world. And if people aren't willing to see that and understand that, they're either blind in one eye and can't see out of the other, or they just don't want to see it. It's not what they are doing to us that is a reflection towards how that we're responding down here. It's the other way around. It's what we are doing down here that is a reflection upon what's happening up there. We as a society got it turned around. What we are doing down here on the planet is the consequences of how the forces of nature are responding to us. It's not the other way around. It's not what they're doing to us that's making us do what we're having to do down here. It's the other way around. And we're basically forcing, humanity is forcing God's hand in showing humanity God's ugly side in no longer protecting us and basically just giving us over to the hounds of hell towards basically being attacked endlessly the way that we're being attacked. And you got to look at it.
Tonight, Yosemite National Park will close for several days.
You got to look at it in the aspect that we are being bombarded by an adversary. It is an enemy, an adversary that is doing this.
Which includes Yosemite Valley, saw unprecedented snowfall this winter season. In some areas, 300% more than usual. And with the temperatures climbing, a big melt is already underway. Joining us now is Yosemite Fire Park Ranger Nancy Philippi. Thank you so much, Nancy. Tell us about the conditions there right now and your biggest fear.
Sure. Good morning, Anna. Of course, things are constantly being assessed. We've got crews out. We keep saying we're all hands on deck since we've been experiencing this winter storm. And going through the valley yesterday, which is the part that we're closing, is a section of Yosemite Valley tonight at 10 p.m. There is some just localized flooding, a little bit of water on the roads, a couple campgrounds, sites impacted. Safety is, of course, our biggest concern, and that is why we are putting that temporary closure in effect tonight. Just want to make sure that we don't have anyone stuck on the side of the valley if there is that extreme flooding that we potentially may see.
Yeah. I understand the region, as we mentioned, experienced snow levels above 300% above normal. So paint the picture of the potential impact this big melt could have. What kind of, ecological damage do you anticipate?
Well, hopefully not too much. There's been a lot of research done. We had the large flood in December 1996 into 1997. So there was a park closure for what we refer to as the 100-year flood then. A lot of studies were done, and we can refer back to what areas were impacted severely so that we can take action now. We also did have another park closure due to flooding in 2017. So we're really taking our lessons learned from those times and are feeling positive with the plan that we have in place. It's unusual to see sandbags out in Yosemite Valley, but they're there, and we're taking as much action as we can based on those other incidents.
Well, good luck to you and all involved in those efforts. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you so much
for joining us. Have a great weekend. Up next, here on Ana Cabrera Reports, charged testimony in the civil rape trial against Donald Trump. The emotional exchanges that...
Did you catch what she was saying? In 96, they considered that as a 100-year event. And now, basically 20 years later, the same 100-year event is going to happen again, or has happened again, pertaining to the massive snowfall. These events are intensifying. They're intensifying in coming together more closely, and they're intensifying in the humongously how much that is actually, the damage it is actually doing. So they're coming together, more closely. And whenever they do hit, they're hitting with a vengeance towards even being more powerful than it was before. There's no doubt that the weather, the planet is heating up. And just like the melting, the acceleration of all the melting snow right now that we're seeing up around Minnesota is what is the contributing factor towards seeing the mighty Mississippi go from one extreme to another, just like we was talking about a while ago. Harsh reality. Harsh reality that still the Homo sapiens here upon to the planet are not grasping in the way that they should be grasping it and reacting the way that they should be reacting to it. Harsh reality.
So we are south of where...
Let's back up a little bit. Let's see what this guy's got to say about all this.
Through the panhandle on Thursday, spawning tornadoes that ripped down trees, destroyed homes, and scattered debris everywhere. Take a look at these pictures. This was this morning. President Biden, by the way, approved Florida's disaster declaration following historic flooding in Broward County earlier this month. Meanwhile, along the already swollen Mississippi River, historic flooding continues to plague communities in the Midwest, forcing many to flee their homes. And the worst effects of these floods could still be days away. Joining us now with more is NBC's Jesse Kirsch in Davenport, Iowa. Jesse, good morning. Boy, I'm just looking at your background. I mean, what are you seeing there today?
Yeah, Jose, what you're looking at behind us here is the beginning. So we are south of where this flooding began. And so what you're looking at here, which should be street, is becoming an extension of the Mississippi River, essentially. You can see off in the distance the actual river and across the border from where I am, Illinois. But where we are right now in Davenport, Iowa, we are bracing for the worst of this. We are not there yet, and I cannot stress that enough because you already see how much of a mess this has created in this community. Off in the distance behind us here along the riverbanks, you can see sandbags and other forms of protection appear to be up against that building in hopes of saving it because, again, they're still expecting the water level here to keep on rising until the middle of the day or so on Monday. So we're still days away of the worst of this here in Davenport. This is flooding that started up in the Twin Cities, has been making its way down here, and this is because, Jose, we had a lot of snow on the ground, and all that snow is now melting. So that snow melt has funneled into the Mississippi River and is creating headaches up and down a major artery of transit and of business. There are barge traffic that has been shut down for the time being. There are other headaches, and again, what we're looking at in this community is just the beginning. So we're bracing for things to get worse here potentially in the days ahead. And just moments ago, Jose, there was a road closed sign here in the middle of the street, and a public works team just picked up that sign and took it away, which I think just speaks to the fact that it's quite obvious that they are having to retreat where they put up warning posts as they continue to wait for things to potentially, the water level to keep rising here, Jose.
Jesse Kirsch in Davenport, thank you. We are back in just 60 seconds with what we know about former Vice President Mike Pence's testimony before a federal grand jury investigating former President Donald Trump's role in the January 6th.
I'm going to leave it right there and saying what I've already done said, that if there's ever been a time that we needed to pray for one another, just as the Bible talks about, forsake not the assemblies of thyself together, even so much as you shall see the days approaching, indicating that we would be able to see, tangibly see these days approaching towards what was fixing to occur. I can't emphasize enough from a spirituality aspect of it towards how crucial it is for us to
There's a frantic search underway for survivors in central Ukraine.
To continue to pray for one another and to bond in a common interest towards the better good to humanity. And what we've seen out of the Russians in the past year and 2 months, whatever, has not been the betterment of the good. Good luck to all of us on this Friday. What is this, April the 27th, maybe? 28th, I don't know. Good luck to each and every one of us in our endeavors towards where we go from here. God bless our troops. God bless America. God bless our endeavors. And I'm right, today is the 28th, April the 28th, the last Friday of this month, year 2023. And shalom.